The scream that ripped through our peaceful suburban street still echoes in my ears. 1 second, my little girl Emma was laughing under the bright afternoon sun, her wheelchair spinning slowly on the grass, and the next she was on fire, screaming, her skin blistering as boiling water splashed across her shoulders. I dropped the groceries right there on the sidewalk and ran, heart pounding, mind blank, as Karen, our HOA neighbor, stood on her porch holding an empty kettle, her face twisted with rage. "I told her not to touch my flowers," she yelled, as if that could justify the horror I was seeing. The smell of burned skin, the sight of my baby crying in terror, it still haunts me. That day changed everything, and it started all because my daughter wanted to play in her own yard. Hey, everyone, before I begin this heartbreaking story, I want to ask you something. Which city are you watching from right now? Drop your city's name down below in the comments, because I love seeing where all of you amazing people are tuning in from. And while you're at it, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you never miss stories like this. Stories that reveal the hidden cruelty, the injustice, and sometimes the strength of ordinary families like mine. Now, let's begin. That day started just like any other sunny afternoon in Maplewood Heights, one of those quiet suburban neighborhoods where everything looked picture perfect. The lawns were neatly trimmed, the mailboxes freshly painted, and the HOA patrolled the streets like it was some sacred kingdom. My daughter Emma, my sweet, brave girl born with a spinal condition, loved sitting outside after therapy sessions, letting the warm breeze touch her face. She couldn't run like other kids, but her laughter, it made the world feel lighter. But to our neighbor, Karen Miller, nothing about Emma's joy was acceptable. Karen was the self-appointed queen of the neighborhood, the kind of woman who carried a clipboard like a weapon and treated the HOA rules like divine law. She'd complained about everything: our mailbox color, Emma's wheelchair ramp, even the sound of her therapy music. I thought it was just bitterness. I never imagined it would turn into something this dark, this cruel. I was wrong, because on that quiet afternoon, when I stepped away for just 10 minutes, Karen did something no parent could ever forgive. And that single act, that moment of senseless rage, shattered our peaceful world forever. It was one of those warm, gentle afternoons where everything felt calm, almost too calm. The kind of day where birds sang in the distance and the faint hum of sprinklers filled the air. I remember standing in the kitchen, slicing apples for Emma's snack, watching her from the window. She was in the yard, her wheelchair parked beneath the big oak tree, humming softly to herself as bubbles floated around her. She looked so peaceful, like she finally belonged in a world that often forgot to make space for her. Emma had always been my miracle. Born premature, doctors said she might never walk. But her smile never dimmed, even on the hardest therapy days. She loved the world in a way most people didn't. Every color, every breeze, every sound was magic to her. That's why the yard was her favorite place. It was her freedom, her safe space. But ever since Karen Miller moved in across the street, that peace had been slowly eroding. Karen was the president of the HOA, and to her, rules mattered more than kindness. She had this habit of watching everyone standing on her porch with her arms crossed, eyes scanning the street like a hawk, looking for prey. She'd left notes in people's mailboxes for parking too close to the curb, for leaving garbage cans out too long, for having curtains that clashed with the neighborhood color scheme. And then came the notes for us. The first one said, "Wheelchair ramps must adhere to HOA aesthetic standards." The second, "Children's toys are to be kept out of sight." The third, "Excessive noise from bubble machines is not permitted." I laughed the first few times. Surely, no one could be that heartless, I thought. But Karen wasn't joking. She started glaring at Emma every time she saw her outside. Once, I caught her standing near our fence, muttering under her breath about eyesores. Another time, she knocked on our door at 8 p.m. just to tell me that Emma's bubble solution had spilled onto the shared grass line, and that I'd be fined for damage to community property. I tried to reason with her. She's a child, Karen. She's just playing. Karen's lips had curled into that fake HOA smile. We all have rules to follow, dear. Disabilities don't exempt anyone from responsibility. That line stayed with me for days. Emma didn't understand any of it. She just kept playing, waving at Karen every time she saw her, hoping one day she'd wave back. But Karen never did. Her eyes, cold and sharp, carried something I still can't define. Disgust? Hatred? Maybe envy. That afternoon, Emma was especially excited. Her therapist had told her she'd made huge progress with her arm movements, so I'd promised her an extra 15 minutes outside before dinner. She'd filled her small bubble machine and was laughing at how the wind carried them over Karen's roses. From the window, I saw Karen come out onto her porch. She stood there, still as a statue, watching the bubbles drift. For a moment, I thought maybe she'd softened, that maybe she'd finally see how harmless it was. But then her face tightened. She went back inside abruptly, slamming her door hard enough to make the mailbox rattle. A strange feeling crawled through me, unease mixed with confusion. I almost went out there, but then the phone rang. It was my sister calling to ask about Mom's upcoming surgery. We talked for barely 10 minutes. Barely. And in those 10 minutes, everything changed. The scream was sharp, too real to be imagined. My body froze, the apple knife clattering from my hand. Then came the second scream, louder, more desperate. It was Emma. I dropped the phone, sprinted to the door, and saw smoke, thin, rising from our yard. My mind couldn't comprehend it. Then I saw her, Emma, flailing, crying, her skin red and peeling. And standing just a few feet away, her kettle still steaming, was Karen. Her expression wasn't shock. It was anger. I told her to stop, she said, her voice trembling but controlled. She was ruining my flowers again. I fell to my knees beside Emma, my hands trembling as I poured the rest of the hose water over her burns. She was shaking, whispering, "Mommy, it hurts, it burns," over and over. My world blurred. Everything except her pain disappeared. Neighbors began to gather, their phones out, their faces pale. Someone called 911. Someone screamed at Karen. But she just stood there, arms folded, eyes cold. As the sirens wailed in the distance, I looked up at her and asked the only question that mattered. Why? Karen didn't answer. She just turned and walked inside, closing her door like nothing had happened. That was the moment something inside me broke. Because I realized this wasn't an accident. It was hatred. Cold, calculated hatred poured straight from a kettle. And I promised myself Karen Miller would pay for what she did to my child. The ambulance ride felt endless, sirens blaring, lights flashing, my trembling hands clutching Emma's as she whimpered in pain. Her skin was blistered, raw, and red. Every time the vehicle hit a bump, she cried out, and I felt my heart shatter again and again. I remember begging the paramedic, "Please, do something. Please, she's just a child." He pressed a cold compress against her shoulder and said softly, "Ma'am, we're doing everything we can. Hang in there." But in those moments, nothing felt enough. When we reached St. Luke's Hospital, they rushed her into the emergency room. I wasn't allowed to follow past the swinging doors. The smell of antiseptic filled the air, and the walls felt like they were closing in. I could still hear her screams echoing from the trauma bay. My legs gave out, and I collapsed onto the waiting room floor. People stared, but I didn't care. My daughter, my innocent little girl, had been attacked in her own yard. Minutes turned into hours. Doctors came and went. Finally, a nurse approached me. "Are you Emma's mother?" she asked gently. I nodded, unable to speak. "Your daughter has second and third-degree burns on her neck, shoulders, and upper back. We've stabilized her, but she'll need several surgeries and long-term rehabilitation." My world tilted. When I finally saw Emma, she was lying motionless in a hospital bed, her tiny body covered in gauze and tubes. Her face was pale, her lips dry, her breathing shallow. But when she opened her eyes and whispered, "Mommy, did I do something bad?" I broke. Completely. I held her hand and said through tears, "No, baby, you didn't do anything wrong. You were just playing. This wasn't your fault." But deep down, I blamed myself for leaving her alone, for trusting that a quiet neighborhood meant safety, for not seeing the monster that lived just across the street. When the police arrived, their questions were cold and clinical. "Did you see the attack happen?" No, I said, choking on the word. But I saw Karen holding the kettle. I saw steam. I saw her yelling. Did she say anything before or after? She said my daughter was ruining her flowers. The officer wrote something in his notebook, then sighed. We'll have to take her statement once she's stable. For now, we'll classify it as an assault investigation. Assault, such a small word for something so cruel. By nightfall, the news had already spread. The local station ran the story, HOA president accused of scalding disabled child. Reporters swarmed the hospital, shoving cameras in my face. Some neighbors came forward to speak out, others stayed silent, afraid of HOA retaliation. But one woman, Mrs. Delgado, told the truth. She'd been watering her plants when it happened. She saw Karen storm out of her house, kettle in hand. She said Karen shouted, "I told you to stay off my lawn," before throwing the water. Her testimony changed everything. Still, Karen denied it all. She told the police Emma must have accidentally tipped over the kettle while trespassing. She even claimed she was boiling water for tea. I wanted to scream. For 2 nights, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it again, Emma's skin burning, Karen's cold eyes, the steam rising in the sunlight. I sat by her hospital bed, watching the monitor beep steadily, whispering prayers that she'd heal, not just her body, but her heart too. Then came the social worker, a calm, soft-spoken woman named Janet. She sat beside me and said, "This is going to be a long road, but we're going to fight this, okay? We'll make sure she gets justice." Those words gave me a tiny spark of strength, because deep down, I knew Karen thought she'd get away with it. She thought her HOA power, her fake politeness, and her neighborhood connections would protect her. But she had no idea who she was dealing with. I wasn't just a grieving mother anymore, I was a storm waiting to rise. The next morning, I watched Emma sleep, her fragile hands wrapped in bandages. I whispered, "You rest, baby. Mommy's going to fix this." And in that moment, something shifted inside me. I stopped feeling afraid, because I realized the woman who poured boiling water on my child didn't just scar Emma. She woke a mother's fury that would burn far hotter than anything she could ever imagine. And from that day forward, I swore Karen Miller would regret ever touching my daughter. The morning after the attack, I woke up in the stiff hospital chair, my neck aching, my heart heavier than ever. The rhythmic beep of Emma's monitor was the only thing keeping me grounded. Her little hand rested in mine, bandaged and trembling even in sleep. The doctor said she'd need skin grafts once the burn stabilized, a word that sounded so cruelly clinical for something so human, so painful. By noon, Detective Harris arrived. A tall, middle-aged man with graying hair and tired eyes, he approached me gently, but with the kind of composure that told me he'd seen horrors like this before. "Mrs. Jensen," he said, "I'm deeply sorry for what happened to your daughter. I need you to walk me through every detail from yesterday." I told him everything, the years of complaints, the harassment, the absurd HOA fines, the hatred behind Karen's eyes. He nodded, jotting notes. "We've already spoken with a few neighbors," he said. "Mrs. Delgado's statement supports your claim. She saw Karen throw something that produced steam, but," he hesitated, "Karen's lawyer is already claiming it was an accident. Says she was just pouring out old water for her tea." My jaw clenched. "She's lying," I hissed. "She looked right at my daughter before she threw it. She knew what she was doing." He nodded again, his expression sympathetic, but cautious. "We're building a case. The HOA has influence here, but don't worry. We're not backing down." That word, influence, stung, because I knew it was true. In our neighborhood, the HOA wasn't just a community group, it was a power circle. Karen's husband sat on the city zoning board, her brother-in-law was a local attorney, and half the neighborhood owed her favors. Justice wouldn't come easy. 2 days later, Karen finally showed her face. Not in person, on the local news. Standing outside her perfectly trimmed yard, wearing a pastel pink blazer, she said calmly into the camera, "I'm devastated by what happened to the Jensen girl, but this was a tragic misunderstanding. I've always cared deeply for our neighborhood children." My blood boiled. The audacity. I marched out of the hospital later that evening and drove straight to the HOA office, a glass-fronted building with their motto etched in stone: community, order, pride. It made me sick. When I entered, Karen was there, sitting behind her desk, flipping through papers as if nothing had happened. Her eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw something new in them. Not guilt, not fear, defiance. "Mrs. Jensen," she said smoothly, "you shouldn't be here. You're emotional, and I understand, but..." I slammed my hands on her desk. "You attacked my daughter. She's 8 years old and lying in a hospital bed because of you." Her expression barely shifted. "You have no proof, dear. You're making accusations that could get you into serious legal trouble." Something inside me snapped. "I'll show you proof," I said, my voice shaking. "I'll show everyone what you did." I walked out before I did something I couldn't take back. But as I left, I noticed a small security camera above the HOA entrance, the kind that recorded everything that happened near the office and across the street. My heart raced. Could there be footage from that day? I returned home that night, my mind racing. The police hadn't mentioned any camera footage, which meant either they didn't know about it or someone didn't want them to. The next morning, I visited the security company listed on the HOA website. The man behind the counter, a young tech specialist named Ethan, looked surprised when I asked for footage from Maplewood Heights. "You'll need an official request," he said. I slid a photo of Emma across the counter, her hospital bandages, her tears. "Please," I whispered. "That woman did this to my little girl. I just need the truth." He hesitated, glanced around, then lowered his voice. "I shouldn't, but I'll check the backups." 10 minutes later, he called me into the back room. On his monitor, grainy footage showed my house across the street, the afternoon of the attack. I watched the timestamp, 3:27 p.m. Then it happened. Karen emerged from her house, kettle in hand. She shouted something toward my yard. Then, emotion, quick and deliberate, she flung the water. A second later, Emma's wheelchair jolted backward as steam erupted. I felt my knees go weak. It was all there. Every second. I turned to Ethan, tears streaming down my face. "Please, can you copy that?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Take it, but be careful. This will cause trouble." Trouble didn't scare me anymore. That night, I handed the footage to Detective Harris. He watched in silence, jaw tightening as the image froze on Karen's face, cold, unfeeling, victorious. He finally said, "This changes everything. We'll move forward with an arrest." For the first time since that horrific day, I felt hope. Maybe justice was possible, after all. But I didn't know then. Karen wouldn't go down quietly. She had connections, and she was about to use every single one of them to destroy us before I could destroy her. And as I held Emma's hand that night, whispering that it would all be okay, I didn't realize the storm that was about to come wasn't over yet. It was just beginning. The day they finally arrested Karen Miller, the entire neighborhood buzzed like a hornet's nest. Some neighbors peeked from behind their curtains, others pretended to water their lawns just to watch the police car outside her house. Karen stood on her porch in that same pastel blazer, handcuffed, but still wearing a smug little smile. It wasn't the look of a guilty woman. It was the look of someone who still believed she'd win. When I saw the news that evening, my stomach twisted. The headline read, "HOA president arrested for assault, claims setup." Setup, that's what she called it. She'd hired one of the most expensive defense attorneys in the county, a slick man named Douglas Hart. He told reporters, "My client is an upstanding citizen with a spotless record. This was a tragic misunderstanding being exploited for attention." I turned off the TV before I smashed it. Exploited for attention? My daughter's pain was not a story, it was our nightmare. The trial started 6 weeks later. The courtroom smelled of polished wood and stale coffee. I sat in the front row, gripping a photo of Emma from before the attack, smiling, healthy, her curls bouncing in the sunlight. Beside me sat Detective Harris, quiet but reassuring. Across the aisle, Karen and her lawyer whispered, occasionally glancing our way. When the footage played, you could hear the gasp ripple through the courtroom. There it was, Karen, shouting, pouring, throwing. Clear as day. I watched her face on the screen, the moment frozen forever. But Douglas Hart stood confidently. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, "you're seeing a misunderstanding. My client was disposing of hot water on her own property. The child, tragically, happened to be nearby. There was no intent to harm. My nails dug into my palms. No intent. She'd looked right at her. Then came the character witnesses, neighbors who either feared Karen or owed her something. One man claimed Karen's a strict rule follower, but she'd never hurt a child. Another said Mrs. Jensen's daughter often played near other people's lawns. Accidents happen. Each word felt like another stab to the chest. I wanted to stand and shout, "You're lying," but the judge's warning look kept me still. Finally, it was my turn. The courtroom went silent as I took the stand. I looked directly at the jury and said, "That's my little girl on the screen. She's 8. She can't walk. She was playing with bubbles when Karen threw boiling water on her. I saw it. I heard her scream. That wasn't an accident. That was hate." The prosecutor asked gently, "What did Karen say afterward?" I swallowed hard. She said my daughter was ruining her flowers. A few jurors lowered their eyes. One woman started to cry. The trial dragged for days. Karen's lawyer twisted every fact, attacked every word. He even accused me of manipulating public sympathy for donations from neighbors. He painted Karen as a misunderstood woman under emotional stress. But then, on the final day, something changed. Mrs. Delgado, the same neighbor who had testified earlier, stood again, holding something in her hands. "I found this," she said, voice trembling. "Karen left a voicemail on my phone the morning of the attack. The judge allowed it to play. The courtroom held its breath as Karen's recorded voice echoed through the speakers. If that girl rolls her chair near my roses again, I swear I'll teach her a lesson." The silence that followed was deafening. Karen's confident mask cracked. Her eyes darted to her lawyer, who suddenly looked pale. The prosecutor turned to the jury. "You heard it yourselves. Intent, malice, deliberate harm." That night, after hours of deliberation, the jury returned. I held my breath as the foreman stood. "We find the defendant, Karen Miller, guilty on all counts." My knees buckled. Tears streamed down my face. I looked at the prosecutor, who nodded softly. It was over, or so I thought, but justice has a cruel way of bending when money and power get involved. A week later, Karen's lawyer filed an appeal claiming procedural errors and new evidence. Her bail was reduced, and within days she was out, smiling again, walking freely while my daughter still screamed in her sleep. Then came the HOA statement, a polished letter delivered to every house. The HOA stands by due process and encourages the community to withhold judgment until all appeals are complete. It felt like a slap in the face. The very people who should have condemned her were protecting her. Emma came home 2 months later, her laughter softer now, her body covered in scars. Every night she'd ask, "Mommy, is the mean lady still there?" I'd tell her no. But deep down, I knew Karen was still just across the street pretending nothing happened. I couldn't sleep. Every sound outside made me jump. Every morning, I'd peek through the blinds to see her tending her flowers, the same ones that started all of this. She'd glance up sometimes, meet my eyes, and smile. A cold, smug smile, like she was saying, "You may have won in court, but I still own this street." That was the moment I realized justice on paper meant nothing if evil still breathed next door. And so I decided if the law couldn't protect my daughter, then I would. With my own hands, I'd make sure Karen Miller never hurt anyone again. After the trial, and after the tiny victory that felt hollow while Karen still lived across the street, I stopped waiting for the world to fix things for us. I began to build a shield around Emma that didn't rely on polite neighbors or a cracked HOA system. It was slow, careful work. Legal pressure, community truth-telling, and something Karen never saw coming, human exposure that couldn't be bought or edited away. First, the civil suit. Detective Harris connected me with a compassionate attorney, Claire Nguyen, who smelled of righteous stubbornness and had a way of turning outrage into paperwork that actually mattered. Criminal court had convicted Karen, but civil court could force consequences money couldn't hide: damages, permanent restraining orders, and a legal record that would follow her forever. Claire filed the suit that week. It wasn't about the money, it was about creating an official paper trail that said, in no uncertain terms, that what Karen did wasn't an accident and it wasn't acceptable. While Claire worked, I started talking, not to reporters this time, to my neighbors. At first, it felt like walking into a minefield. I knew how many were entangled with Karen, but there were also people who had been quiet out of fear, not liking. I visited Mrs. Delgado again, and she brought forward another neighbor who had once found threatening notes in his mailbox after complaining about Karen's fines. Bit by bit, the quiet changed. People told me about petty cruelty, about calls to landlords, about whispered rumors of Karen's control. They had been waiting for permission to speak. I gave it to them. We created a private group, not on the HOA list, but a closed community chat where neighbors could share photos, voicemails, and small incidents they'd dismissed before. That chat became a small, fierce archive. A gardener posted a photo of a kettle identical to the one from the footage, with scorch marks on the handle. A teenager shared a video of Karen yelling at kids to stay out of my sight. These didn't replace the footage that put her behind bars, but they painted a fuller picture of pattern and intent. Meanwhile, Emma's recovery progressed in fits and starts. Skin grafts, therapy, nights of nightmares. She was brave in ways adults rarely are. Small victories. A laugh coaxed from her when her therapist made silly faces the first time she painted with her uninjured hand. Each triumph fueled me. The civil suit became less about revenge and more about preventing anyone else from being a target. Karen retaliated in the only ways she knew how, through reputation and paperwork. She filed motions to delay the civil case, accused me of harassing her neighbors when we encouraged them to testify, and used every procedural stall to drag the fight into months. The HOA, which had published its careful neutral statements, quietly sent notices threatening fines to some of the neighbors who posted about the case on their personal pages. It was petty, but it was effective. Fear kept mouths shut. We responded with organization. Claire subpoenaed HOA records and emails and found a pattern of Karen using HOA meetings to bully dissenters into silence. The judge allowed that evidence. More neighbors came forward, and one by one, their courage lit the courtroom. The video footage replayed, the voicemail played again. The civil jury began to understand the full, ugly context of Karen's behavior. On the third week of testimony, Karen's composure finally cracked. She took the stand and tried to paint herself as a stressed woman who'd made a mistake, but under cross-examination, her stories tangled. The jurors watched the woman who had once stood on a porch polishing her clipboard, now fumbling explanations about tea and scalding, and how she never meant to harm a child. A few jurors wiped tears, others scowled. The gap between her pastel blazer and revealed malice was stark. But this story wasn't one-sided. Karen wasn't a cartoon villain who simply fell apart. She lashed out. After one courtroom day, my car tires were slashed in the middle of the night. My mailbox was vandalized with hate-filled stickers calling us liars. Anonymous letters arrived, accusing me of lying for donations. I reported everything. It was terrifying and small, the kind of cruelty designed to wear you down. But it also had the opposite effect. Each petty act made neighbors angrier at the injustice. People who'd once feared Karen began to quietly support us. The teenager who filmed her yelling, the mail carrier who had seen the notes, the woman who signed the petition to remove Karen from the HOA presidency before the assault. They handed over statements or showed up at hearings. Tired of being governed by fear, the civil jury delivered a verdict that felt like sunlight after a long storm. Karen was ordered to pay significant damages and was hit with a permanent injunction. She was forbidden from coming within a specified distance of Emma, forbidden from contacting any member of our household, and mandated to complete anger management and community service. The court record also forced the HOA to open a review. Several board members quietly resigned under pressure. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to breathe. But the true, reckoning was quieter and sweeter than any legal sentence. It came the day Emma, scarred but smiling, rolled out into our yard for the first time since the attack without flinching. She chased bubbles with a new gusto, eyes bright, and waved at neighbors who came to sit on their stoops and watch. They waved back. Some even called out apologies they'd never dared voice before. A man we'd never spoken to stopped by with a small bouquet, not Karen's roses but a wild assortment from his own garden, and set them by our gate. For Emma, he said simply, justice hadn't erased the pain. The scars on Emma's skin would remain, and the echo of that scream would never entirely leave me. But the scales had tipped. Karen's power had been exposed for what it was, a small, cruel force amplified by silence. Once those around her chose truth over fear, her world began to collapse on its own. As we drove home from yet another follow-up appointment, Emma squeezed my hand and said, in that soft, resilient voice she has, "Mommy, can we plant sunflowers next to the oak?" I smiled through the exhaustion and thought of how the sunflowers would turn their faces toward brightness. We planted them that weekend, bright, stubborn, and defiantly beautiful, a small living proof that even after fire, life remembers how to grow. 6 months after the verdict, our street looked the same oak trees, the same pastel houses, but the air felt lighter. Karen's house sat empty, its lawn overgrown, its for sale signs sun-faded and crooked. The queen of Maplewood Heights was gone, and yet her shadow lingered. I'd thought that the day she left would feel like victory, but as I watched the moving truck pull away, I didn't feel triumph. I felt something closer to peace, quiet, fragile peace. Emma had grown stronger by then. The scars on her shoulders had faded to pale pink, but the ones inside her took longer. For months, she'd wake up from nightmares whispering, "Mommy," the hot water, but over time she started to smile again. Therapy helped. So did art. She painted sunsets and flowers, bright, defiant colors, and said each one was a happy ending. One day, her therapist suggested we visit the yard again, the same spot where everything changed. I hesitated at first. The memory of that scream still made my hands shake. But Emma insisted. "I want to play again," she said softly. So we went. The air was warm, the same kind of gentle sunlight as that day. She rolled her chair under the oak tree, looked up and said, "It doesn't hurt anymore, Mommy." I stood there, tears slipping down my cheeks. That moment, her bravery, her peace, it felt like true justice. Not the courtroom kind, not the legal documents or the verdicts. The real justice, the kind where healing becomes louder than pain. But fate wasn't done giving us closure yet. A week later, I received a letter. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with shaky handwriting. "Mrs. Jensen, I know you'll never forgive me, and I don't deserve it. The truth is, I hated seeing what I didn't understand. Your daughter smiled in ways I forgot how to. I was angry at my own life, and I took it out on you both. The day I hurt her, I saw myself, bitter, cruel, empty. I see it every night. I hope someday your daughter keeps smiling, even if I can't anymore." Karen, my hands trembled. I didn't know if it was guilt, manipulation, or genuine remorse, but for the first time, Karen sounded human. Broken, but human. I burned the letter that evening, not out of hatred, but to release it, to let go of the fire that had haunted us for too long. That night, Emma asked if she could light a candle before bed. "For people who are mean," she said, "so they can learn to be kind again." I smiled through the ache. "That's beautiful, baby." As the small flame flickered in the dark, I realized my daughter, the one the world tried to break, had more strength and grace than anyone I'd ever known. Months later, we started a small charity, Emma's Light Foundation, to help burn victims and disabled children find therapy and community support. Donations came from neighbors, friends, and strangers who'd followed our story online. Even Detective Harris showed up at the first fundraiser, smiling proudly as Emma handed him a homemade thank you card. Karen's name was never mentioned again in our home. She had taken enough from us. She didn't deserve a legacy. Now every time I watch Emma in the yard, painting, laughing, free, I'm reminded that strength doesn't come from revenge. It comes from rebuilding what was meant to destroy you. And if you're a parent listening to this right now, remember, protect your child, fight for them, but never let hatred turn you into what hurt you. Because forgiveness isn't weakness, it's freedom. So, tell me in the comments, what would you have done if this happened in your neighborhood? Would you forgive or would you fight back? And if you believe no child should ever suffer from someone else's cruelty, hit that subscribe button. Because here, we tell stories that deserve to be heard, no matter how painful they are. This was our story, the story of how fire tried to destroy love, and love refused to burn. Because even after the flames, Emma's light never went out. If this story broke your heart, don't let it end here. Let's turn pain into purpose. Broken heart, tell me in the comments. What would you have done if this happened on your street? Would you stand up or stay silent? Your voice matters more than you think. And if you believe every child deserves safety no matter their abilities, hit subscribe, share this video, and help me spread awareness. Together, we can make sure stories like Emma's are never ignored again. Because sometimes justice starts not in a courtroom, but right here with you.